My name is David Anvari, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Mobile Instrument Service and Repair. We're an independent service organization on surgical equipment in hospitals. I'm joined today by Gary Fansler, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Medical Device Servicing Organizations, a trade association that works with independent servicing organizations. We're here today to talk a little bit about the FDA's recent interest in regulating the reusable medical device servicing market. Gary, can you give the audience a brief summary of what this issue is all about?
Sure, David. Thank you. So really the issue is about whether or not there's a need for regulation. And this isn't a new issue. Actually, the FDA looked at this long ago, back to the 1990s. However, last March they opened a public docket, and then in October they held a public workshop really to discuss whether or not the third-party repair should be appropriately regulated by the FDA or another non-governmental organization. During that time, while it was going on, the user fees were up for reauthorization, and there was an attempt to add language to the MDUFA for approval that would have third-party organizations register with the FDA, maintain an internal complaint handling system, and report adverse events to the FDA. In June, during the Energy and Commerce Full Committee markup of the user fee reauthorization, it was determined that there would be no regulation added at that time, but they would allow the FDA to finish their work and then provide a report on those findings. So I think good news for all in the amount of work that has been done for the by the FDA in looking at the need for this. So David, with that in mind, as a service provider yourself, can you tell us a little bit about what are the arguments in favor of regulation?
Yeah, I think they really come down to four principal things. The first one is safety and efficacy of medical devices. No one wants harm to come to a patient through the use of a medical device. And secondly, we want the results that come from that device, whether used diagnostically or operatively, to be effective. So it's safety and efficacy. The second thing is that in many ways it is a bit of an unfair application of the rules to the manufacturers. There's rules that they have to follow for a certain segment of their business that other providers of that same service don't have to provide, and one could argue that's not a very level playing field. The third main argument in favor of regulation is that right now manufacturers lose visibility to a device when they're no longer servicing it. So if that device is resold to another hospital, if it's been remanufactured, the manufacturer can't track it the way that they would normally, which leaves them a little bit blind as to the full life cycle of the device. And the final argument in favor of regulation is that it is possible that we are missing some of the adverse events that might get reported to the FDA. The FDA does require hospitals to provide that information, and certainly if hospitals are doing that today, all those reports should be getting in, but it's possible that some aren't, and an independent organization might be aware of it.
And that's interesting. So on the flip side, could you tell us a little bit about the arguments against regulation?
So the main argument against regulation is simply that there's no evidence that there's a real problem here to solve. The only independent study of this issue was conducted by the ECRI Institute, an independent organization that looks at all sorts of data related to healthcare safety. And they searched over 2.1 million records, a decade's worth of reports to the FDA of medical device malfunctions, and they could only find 96 of those reports that had anything to do with device servicing. And even those 96, it's questionable whether all of them related to it. So that's a potential incidence rate of 0.0005%. So there's really no evidence that the problem exists. I think there's a practical issue as well, aside from just the fact that there's not any evidence of a problem, and that is that the federal quality systems rules were really designed specifically for manufacturers. Of all of them, we believe about 1 in 4 of those rules might apply to servicing organizations, and even then they're going to require substantial revision to be enforced in any way that's meaningful. And then finally, there's a perception that there's no regulation of this industry today, when in fact, because we work for the hospitals and the hospitals are subject to CMS, Joint Commission, and state health authority regulation of their maintenance programs for reusable medical equipment, there's a great deal of scrutiny that goes on independent service organizations, and those that don't deliver safe, effective, and efficient repairs and service are not going to be in business for very long. So those are the arguments in favor and against regulating. But Gary, we've talked about the issue, the arguments both ways. If you're a healthcare supply chain executive listening to this discussion, what's the relevance of this to them? Why should they care?
Sure. I think there's really 5 reasons that they should care about it, potential impacts of this. One is it could lead to reduced choice and increased cost within the repairs and maintenance of your medical devices. Secondly, it could force you to prematurely replace devices due to lack of service options. Thirdly, it could require the clinical engineers at the hospital to register required registration as well, meaning they would have to, anybody who touches a medical device has to register to take care of that device. Fourthly, limitation to your convenient on-location service at your hospital that provides access to proactive education programs, training, advice, and preventive maintenance. And then finally, the 5th thing is lost opportunities to reduce cost of ownership and reduce capital spend. I think those are the 5 things that are really at the forefront should this legislation go forward.
Gotcha. So if those are the things that make it relevant, what if anything can a healthcare supply chain executive do today to prepare for potential outcomes from this effort by the government?
Sure. I think that there's a few things that you can do, and one is know your business and what's going on. So I think that making sure that your people are educated on when you want to use an independent service organization when a device is out of warranty versus when you want to use an original manufacturer for that service when it's in warranty. Things like that, identifying where you're spending money today and understand how you're funded to do that. I think also reviewing and understanding what's going on in the regulatory world today and paying attention to that and how it could impact you is something that would be beneficial, as well as determining if your current independent service organizations are running quality management systems today. There's a little bit of a implication by some of this legislation that's recommended that independent service organizations don't do quality systems. And the reality is many third-party repair companies have gone to extreme cost and lengths to efforts to get ISO certified as well as develop quality systems for the work that they do. And then I think the last thing is really know what's happening to your devices. So make sure you have instructions for use, make sure you have specifications, and make sure you have a documentation of what's been happening to your device, the service history of that.
Gotcha. So, certainly in many ways, things that are happening in Washington feel like they're a little bit out of our control, but I think in this particular case, it would really be to the benefit of hospitals and the healthcare supply chain professional to stay on top of things and really do much more to deep dive into how independent service organizations work with you today. So that's it for this brief discussion. We hope you've enjoyed it. Again, I'm David Anbari, and I'm joined by Gary Fansler. Thank you.